It's been phenomenal. My name's Dylan. I'm an alcoholic. I'm coming to you guys from Flagstaff, Arizona. My home group is the Bone Crushing Juggernauts group. We meet on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. If you're ever in the area, please drop in. I've got a sponsor who knows he's my sponsor. Wasn't always the case. And I don't have any sponsees right now, but I'm getting my hand up. And yeah, Dano, thank you for asking me to be here. I just celebrated 5 years of continuous sobriety last Monday, or this Monday. And my sobriety journey actually started in Southern California about 13 years ago. So this is meaningful for me in a lot of ways to come back where I started, right? And I'm talking about 8 and 9, but I was unwilling to do an 8 or 9, right? I was unwilling to really do an honest 4 or a 5. And what I've come to learn is that the steps are sequential and they compound on each other, right? So if I don't take a thorough first step, and I don't take a thorough second step, and bring that into my third step, I can't really do a fourth step. I can't really do a fifth step. And I'm going to be stuck with those character defects, and the amends that I try to make from the people that I say I've harmed isn't going to give me the requisite spiritual experience I need to be able to live life without drugs or alcohol. And until I did the steps that came before 8 and 9, I was going to stay drunk, and that was my story. That's what happened. I would say, other than the priests here, I've spent more time than anyone here in monasteries. I grew up going to a school that was at a monastery for 8 years, and then when my life blew up in Los Angeles back in 2015, 2016, I spent 5 months at a monastery in New York called St. Christopher's Inn that changed my life. So yeah, it's good to be here. But I went to a Catholic school. I was, when we're in 8 and 9, we're making a list of the people we've harmed, then making an amends to them. I'll get into some of my amends stories in a little bit, but my Catholic upbringing kind of taught me that, I was sinful, right? And then, my first, initiation into an amends process was, the sacrament of reconciliation, they call it now. And I just didn't jive with that. It's like, you want me to sit in a box with a priest and tell him I watched South Park and looked at nudie photos? I don't know the purpose of this. I'm supposed to fear, and then I'm supposed to be like, well, this sin's weighted this way, and if you lust a woman, it's the same as murder. All this stuff that I heard and was just like, I can't vibe with that idea of God, of what you're asking me to do and the reason why you're asking me to do it. So I pushed back. What I now realize is that that act of atonement they were asking to do, I just didn't understand it, right? And what AA is asking me to do is to get rid of, it's in the previous steps is we're essentially trying to rid ourselves of this selfishness, right? Or it kills us. And by the time we get to 8 and 9, we've done all this written work, all this internal work. And now it's time to go put it out in the world, right? Now it's time to put it into action, like Dano read on 76. The chapter's, in fact, called Into Action. Faith without works is dead, right? And, one of the, when I was kind of rushed preparing for this, because I thought I was doing 6 and 7, one of the quotes that came up from my Catholic upbringing was from St. Anselm's. The Latin is Fides Quaerens Intellectum, right? Faith searching for understanding, right? And this amends process we're doing is kind of, in my experience, these last 5 years, and actually doing all of my amends and doing them the way my sponsor asked me to do them. I'd done amends in the previous 8 years, but like I never brought God into the amends, right? I brought myself, I brought my need for feeling better about the things that I'd done into it, but I hadn't like truly surrendered, right? I was like the amends process to me was still a one-way street. It was like, I need to be absolved of my wrongs, right? And I didn't know it because I hadn't really taken a third step, right? So I was doing all these steps, and if you're new and you've been in and out, and you drank after an 8th and a 9th step like I have, like with years sober, like I invite you to like revisit, the spiritual building blocks of the program in 1, 2, and 3, because I needed to. Unfortunately, I had to after pretty embarrassing 2-month relapse. But so it leads us off there, saying faith without works is dead, right? We make a list. It comes from our 4th and 5th step sometimes, and the irony for me in the 4th and the 5th step is that like I let out all these resentments I have towards everybody else in the world, right? And then I pause when like I've done things wrong to other people, right? When I know that the relief that I felt internally from forgiving those that have done me wrong, right? I hold that back when I pause when trying to make an amend in step 9, right? So like we felt if you've done the 5th step, right, you're asking God to forgive you of these and relieve you of these fears, of these resentments. And God's, a clear part in the directions in 4 and 5, and then clearly in 6 and 7. But like in 8 and 9, I'm not Catholic, right? I'm not Catholic. I'm baptized, but one of my favorite thinkers and like what's helped me this last 5 years, a guy named Father Richard Rohr, I've done the steps in breathing underwater. I've done the steps through the 12 and 12. I've done them as they're laid out and into action, or I've done the amends as they're laid out and into action. But one of the awakenings I had this most recent time was this quote of his. To refuse reconciliation is to deny another person the dignity of giving them their own forgiveness. We are never the sole actors in grace. Grace is always a shared dance. That one hit me, because when I wanted to make an amends to in previous sobrieties when I was younger, as I said, I just wanted that forgiveness. I wasn't willing to look at the other side of the street, and that like my pause in making some amends, and I had paused making amends that I've since made, and I've got one amends on 6 and 7 with my sponsor right now, and I've got an amends that's 5 years old that I've got to make now. And it's time for it, and it had like completely passed my mind, but it's time, right? And like, if I stall in doing that, I am blocking somebody else's spiritual growth, whether they know it or not, right? And if I want to stay sober, right, it says, in Bill's story, it's pretty clear. This whole, journey starts off with, if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead, right? So it's, when I'm on these steps now, like this is my spirit, like this is enlarging my spiritual life, right? Up until this point, like the steps have all been kind of solitary, right? Like I'm going through them with my sponsor, I'm reading the book, I'm telling like him how I'm powerless over these certain things, all the wrongs I've done, my sex inventory, and now I need to go fucking do it, or else my spiritual life is not gonna get bigger, and I'm not gonna be able to resist a drink, and that's been my experience. the, you know, with the amends process, I also do the Back to Basics program. I don't know if any of you guys, I know there's a lot of Big Book Awakening folks here. I'm interested in that. I started a group with that in Kauai, and then I drank, so they kicked me out. But in doing the Back to Basics workshops, like kind of taking a look at some AA history and how they did them back in the day, and you know, these are just kind of you know, my thoughts. So it's not laid out directly in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but you know, when I have a sponsee that comes to me and wants to make amends to his ex-girlfriend, I tell him no, like that there's a waiting period we need to have, and that we need to go through the other steps first. You know, in the Back to Basics workshop, there's 3 ways that we make amends, right? We do direct amends, we do indirect amends, and then we do living amends. So I thought I'd just share some of my experiences in that context. You know, when you know, the most difficult amends I had to make, I didn't even make, but I was willing to make it, right? I was sober in Monterey, California for a little while, in and out of the rooms, and I was probably 26, 27, and another woman in the rooms, we became close. I picked her up for a date, and she was loaded, right? And instead of calling her sponsor, I probably had 2-3 weeks sober. I didn't. We went to dinner and a movie and hooked up. I returned, you know, dropped her back off at her sober living, and then ghosted her, right? Like a gentleman. And I just stuffed that under the rug for a while, and then in this most recent sobriety, like, it came up in my inventory, and my sponsor was like, "Well, do you know?" I was like, I vaguely remember her name, and he's like, "Well, why don't you do the best you can to find her," right? And so I spent a few hours on Facebook and Instagram and like searched a first name that was distinct, and like went through pages and pages, and I found her, right? And then I reached out to her, and I sent her a message, see if she was willing to talk. She was like, "I don't know who you are." And I was like, "Well, did you live in Monterey, California from X period to X period?" And she's like, "Yes, I did, but I still have no idea who you are." So I knew I had found the right person. And what I wanted to do was to tell her everything that happened and everything that I was sorry for, and to like get this weight off my chest, right? But what my sponsor had told me to do was just send her a message and then, you know, talk to him. So I gave him a call. I was like, "What should I do?" He's like, "You should do nothing. It's not your place. You know, if she doesn't remember you or is unwilling to, you don't know what she's gone through." It looked like she's been leading a healthy life and had gotten sober herself, but like, it wasn't my place. The point being, like, I made a direct amends that was very uncomfortable, and it was for the first time in my life, it was really putting like faith into action. I had like, you know, faith's a funny word, right? And like, you know, these are kind of the atonement steps. But like, you know, when I think about faith, especially in these steps, I think of that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. At the end, he's like, he's got to go through all these like trials, and he's like, "Only the penitent man will pass. Only the penitent man will pass." Then he like kneels, and like the whip shot, the saw like comes through, and like he just dodges it, right? It's like, I've got to humble myself, right? Like, I've got to, like, you know, he steps out into the bridge, and like there's nothing there, and like then the bridge appears, right? When like, you know, in that moment, like I walked through and I like faced my actions that I wanted to just keep buried and tell no one and not be telling a group of people here 10 years after the fact. And I wasn't proud of how I acted, right? That like as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't help another member of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And it saved me, right? Like, I don't know, I didn't know that it would, but like after that, like everything just like cleared up for me. Like I finally felt what the action of willingness looked like, and like how freeing that could be. Now that's a direct amends. I also used to drive drunk in Southern California quite a bit. One time woke up in San Francisco and didn't know how I got there. At the time I lived in Los Feliz. I was in at least 4 hit and runs that I remember, of either parked cars or like traffic fender benders that I like was drunk and just fucking drove off. I can't track those people down, right? I don't know what cars I hit. I can't tell you the years or the dates that it happened, but it definitely happened. But what I can do, in an indirect and kind of a living amends way, is like if somebody bumps into me, like, or slams their door accidentally into me at the parking lot, I cannot react, right? I cannot make it a personal attack on me as a human, right? I've done things that like I can't withhold forgiveness, right? And that's what the amends process has taught me. I can't demand forgiveness and then be slow to dole it out, right? Like I've got to be instantaneous with it, because if I'm not, it's going to lead to a resentment, and I don't do very well with resentments. The other thing are living amends, right? So, in the olden times, in the 40s and back to basics, like the direct amends were typically just like financial. Like you go out and most people had bar tabs they had to clean up and money they owed all over town, and they had to get a payment plan together. They would also write letters as like indirect amends to people. But for me, the most important part of this 8 and 9 process are the living amends. And I had a real experience with it doing a Back to Basics workshop 3 years ago, that I didn't really grasp, right? Or in previous times in the program. But the living amends for me, like, I was talking to Tom. Actually, I'll save that. 4 year, the day, so I just celebrated my 5-year anniversary on Monday, the 25th, and but the 24th was the 4-year anniversary of the day my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. All right. And he passed away 4 months after the fact, 9 years sober. So like my anniversaries are kind of weird. Like there's like a really traumatic, event the day before, but like I had been blessed with that like year of like, I started a meeting in Colorado. I like went through the steps. I started making like these amends. I like for the first time, like really become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous instead of a observer of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got to sit with my dad on his deathbed. I got to hang out with him those weeks before and like make amends in that process of like being sober and giving back and setting things right there, right? But the living amends was that I got to make a vow to him that I wouldn't drink again and be like a burden to my mom and mean it, right? And like the way I view that now is that like when Dano asked me to speak, I say yes. I have a home group that I go to every Saturday. I get my hand up, like I enlarge my spiritual life, right? And that's been the whole difference. I used to see the amends as an apology, right? That this, like, I needed to tell people I was sorry for what I've done, and that what I did was only because I was drunk, right? And what I've learned from sponsors is that like I need to take but out of my vocabulary when I make an amends, right? Is that like it's, keep it to the facts, and that in each amend I make, there's a living amend to it, right? That like my amend doesn't mean shit if I drink again, right? If I if I make an amends to my brother for stealing money from him, even if I don't steal money from him again, but I drink again, it cheapens that sacred experience we had together, right? Of me including him on this like spiritual experience of like asking for forgiveness and him giving it to me, right? This like experience of grace, right? And what I've learned in this last round of step work is that like I have an amends to make to AA too, right? Like I took advantage of people here, right? Like I wasted people's time, right? I showed up to meetings drunk. Pretty logical place to show up if you ask me, but I looked at the rooms as like dating pools and like social networks and maybe get a better job when I was first coming in, right? And the way I make that amends is I show up freely. I don't date in the rooms anymore, right? I don't use people for what I need. And, ultimately it's like, how do I get out of this selfishness? This the bondage of self, right? And I don't have all the answers. I don't do these steps alone, right? And if I'm like confused about where to go or what to do, I ask somebody. I've got enough men in my life now to where like if I need to make an amend, I can ask them. Me being here is it's just being asked to come here. I work in the treatment field, right? And I am not spiritually fit right now, right? And like hearing all these speakers, I'm like, fuck, I gotta like talk after it. I do not feel fit. I feel like just like overwhelmed and like vacant and like just not in a good spot. So like I feel like a fraud talking about 8 and 9 here. But maybe that's like where I'm, it gets to my character defect of needing to like feel perfect or need to be perfect, right? And like, I guess what I'm saying is if you struggle with 8 and 9 or you have like questions about it, there's clear cut directions in the book, and there's like so many people here that can help you out. I've seen miracles. 5. Okay. I thought I was already done. Shit. Part of the reason I'm struggling is a close friend of mine and like an alumni of a program I work for. He, in the book they talk about tough amends, right? Like, and I didn't get to this part, but like, unless to do so would injure them or others, right? Close friend of mine, alumni of this program I work for, he got sober, turned his life around, did the steps, became like model AA, right? And like a year and a half into his sobriety, he got charged with murder in the 2nd degree. He copped to it. Like he walked through it with faith and dignity, and like they had some evidence on him, but he faced it head on, stayed sober, went through the court proceeding, right? And he did everything. Like he stayed sober in the face of so much fear. It's just like to witness it is like it just gives me chills. Like he didn't run. He kept chairing his meeting. He kept sponsoring his guys. And then 2 weeks ago, he's sentenced to 12 years in prison, right? Sober, right? I'm like, where the hell is God there? Right? And like, I don't know, but like, I don't think it's for me to find out, right? Or for me to like have answers for immediately. I don't know who he's going to impact. I don't know if there is a reason, but I know that there's going to be a meaning, right? And I think that, with my dad passing, with, people we lose in the rooms, like I still fight, like trying to like rationalize with God, like why, or rationalize with something that happens and try and fit it into a box, right? Including the amends, right? And I think, I started off reading like, faith without works is dead, right? Like, I don't know what my faith is today. I just know that like, I've had so much grace put in front of me, right? Like, I've had so many people help me when I didn't deserve it. Things aren't always going to be great, but if I can keep my side of the street clean, right, with 8 and 9, and I can keep my eyes open, I can stay like able to help people, right? Because like ultimately, if I'm not in 6 and 7, if I'm not in 8 and 9, if I'm not spiritually fit, I'm unable to help other people, and I'm unable to show up for myself, and I'm going to drink again, right? But if I can just like turn off this like questioning thing, and look at the fact that this guy is gonna make an amends, right? He's going to like it's not going to be easy. I don't think it's just. It's certainly not fair. But there's going to be like a spiritual growth that comes from it. And like, who am I to determine what that is and what's right and wrong in that? Yeah, I apologize for rambling. And thanks for listening.